Welcome to American National Government. In this course, you will discuss the purpose, structure, and evolution of United States government.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from American Government Roots and Reform, American Government by Lenz and Holman, and our course-assigned OpenStax American Government textbook. This lecture focuses on gerrymandering, incumbency, and the mechanics of congressional insulation. The core question is this: when district lines and incumbency advantages decide most outcomes before the general election begins, what part of representation is still genuinely competitive? The core competency is to explain how elections, partisanship, and divided government influence the policymaking process. When district lines and incumbency advantages decide most outcomes before the general election begins, what part of representation is still genuinely competitive? The conflict moves through map drawing, primary elections, residential sorting, incumbency finance, and court review long before most voters see a November ballot. Congressional elections are often described as direct contests of public opinion, but in practice they are filtered through a complex system of geographic boundaries, institutional advantages, and partisan incentives. The most fundamental of these filters is the process of redistricting and the practice of gerrymandering. After each decennial census, the 435 seats in the House of Representatives are reapportioned among the states based on population changes. State legislatures or independent commissions then draw the specific boundaries for each congressional district. This process is not a neutral administrative task. It is a strategic exercise in vote allocation designed to maximize party advantage, protect incumbents, or fulfill legal requirements under the Voting Rights Act. Gerrymandering relies on two primary techniques: packing and cracking. Packing involves concentrating the opposing party's supporters into as few districts as possible, ensuring they win those seats by overwhelming margins but wasting their surplus votes. Cracking involves spreading the opposing party's supporters across multiple districts so they remain a permanent minority and cannot win a majority in any of them. By using sophisticated data on precinct-level voting history and demographic trends, mapmakers can create districts that are remarkably safe for one party, even in states where the statewide popular vote is closely divided. The result is that the majority of House seats are not competitive in the general election, meaning the primary election, where a much smaller and more ideological group of voters participates, becomes the decisive contest. The incumbency machine layers on top of this geographic design. A sitting member of Congress possesses a suite of resources that are unavailable to a challenger. These include a professional staff in both Washington and the home district, a casework operation that assists constituents with federal agencies, and significant name recognition built through years of media coverage and public appearances. Incumbents also have franking privileges, allowing them to send mass mailings to their constituents at taxpayer expense, and they have established relationships with donor networks and interest groups. Statistics consistently show that incumbents in the House and Senate win re-election at rates exceeding 90%, even when national approval of Congress as an institution is low. This suggests that the election system often functions as an insulation system, protecting individual members from the broad tides of national dissatisfaction. Divided government is another structural feature of the American electoral system. Because the President, the House, and the Senate are elected on different schedules and through different geographic units, it is common for one party to control the executive branch while the other controls at least one chamber of the legislature. Since 1953, the United States has experienced divided government more than 60% of the time. The split control is not always a deliberate choice by voters to balance power. It is often the mechanical result of a system that filters public opinion through different institutional windows at different times. Divided government changes the nature of congressional action by forcing leaders to choose between high-stakes negotiation, deliberate stalemate, or aggressive oversight, and investigation of the opposing party's administration. The Constitution establishes the basic rules for congressional representation, but it does not specify how districts should be drawn or how parties should organize the electoral process. Article 1, Section 2 requires that House members be elected every 2 years and that seats be apportioned among the states according to population. Article 1 of Section 4 gives state legislatures the primary authority to determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, though it also reserves for Congress the right to alter such regulations. This shared authority created the decentralized system we have today, where election rules vary significantly from state to state. The size of the House of Representatives was not fixed by the Constitution. For more than a century, Congress increased the number of seats as the national population grew. However, after the 1920 census, Congress failed to reapportion itself because of intense political conflict between rural and urban states. The impasse was finally resolved by the Reapportionment Act of 1929, which permanently capped the number of House seats at 435. This cap meant that as the population continued to grow and shift, representation became a zero-sum game. For one state to gain a seat, another state had to lose one. This increased the political stakes of the decennial census and the subsequent redistricting battles as parties fought over a limited number of institutional assets. The Senate follows a different logic of representation, where each state has 2 members regardless of population. Originally, senators were chosen by state legislatures, a system designed to insulate the upper chamber from direct popular pressure. The 17th Amendment, ratified in 1913, established the direct election of senators by the people. While this made the Senate more democratic, the statewide nature of Senate elections and the 6-year terms still provide a different type of insulation than the House. A senator can withstand a temporary national wave better than a House member because they have more time to rebuild their coalition and because they represent a fixed geographic unit that cannot be gerrymandered. The rise of the nationalized party system has further modified the constitutional design. In the 19th century, elections were often local affairs focused on regional interests. Today, congressional elections are steadily nationalized, with voters choosing candidates based on their party's national brand and their stance on high-profile presidential issues. This nationalization reduces the importance of a candidate's local personality and increases the importance of the party's standing in the national polls. When voters vote the party line, they are using an information shortcut that simplifies the choice but also binds individual members more tightly to their national leadership. This creates a tension between the members' duty to represent a specific district and their commitment to a national partisan agenda. The legal order around districting tightened through statute and litigation. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, especially Section 2 and the now suspended preclearance regime, once enforced under Section 5, forced states to consider minority vote dilution when they drew maps. The Supreme Court added another layer through one-person, one-vote cases such as Wesbury v. Sanders in 1964, which required congressional districts to contain roughly equal populations. That meant modern map drawers did not operate on a blank slate. They worked inside population equality rules, race law constraints, census data, and state political incentives that turned every line into a calculation about power. A sitting member of Congress operates inside a professionalized infrastructure that is designed to maintain their incumbency. The most important part of this infrastructure is the congressional staff. Each House member is allotted a budget to hire up to 18 full-time employees, while senators receive larger budgets based on the population of their state. These staffers are divided between the Washington office, where they focus on legislation and policy, and the district or state offices, where they focus on constituent service. This casework, helping a veteran receive benefits from the VA, assisting a traveler with a lost passport, or helping a local business navigate a federal regulation, is a powerful tool for building nonpartisan goodwill. A voter who receives help from their representative's office is far more likely to support that representative regardless of their party affiliation. Fundraising is the other major pillar of the incumbency advantage. Elections in the United States have become extraordinarily expensive, with a competitive House race often costing millions of dollars and a Senate race costing tens of millions. Incumbents have a massive advantage in this environment because they have established relationships with political action committees, PACs, donor networks, and interest groups. Donors generally prefer to give to incumbents because they are seen as safe bets who already have institutional power. This financial advantage allows incumbents to start their campaigns earlier, run more advertisements, and hire better consultants than their challengers. The money primary, the struggle to raise enough funds to deter a credible opponent, often happens months before the actual election. The institutional branding of the office also provides insulation. Members of Congress use their committee assignments, their ability to introduce legislation, and their access to the media to claim credit for federal projects and policies that benefit their district, whether it is a new bridge, a research grant for a local university, or a favorable change in a tax law. The member uses these pork barrel projects to demonstrate their effectiveness to their constituents. This credit claiming allows the member to build a personal brand that is distinct from the national party. In a lopsided or gerrymandered district, an incumbent who provides excellent casework and brings home federal resources is almost impossible to defeat, even if the national mood is turning against their party. Divided government creates a specific set of pressures for individual members. In a unified government, members are expected to follow their party's agenda to ensure the passage of the president's program. In a divided government, members of the president's party often find themselves in a defensive role, while members of the opposition party use their committee power to conduct oversight and investigations. This can lead to a messaging strategy where the House passes bills that have no chance of passing the Senate or being signed by the president, but which serve to satisfy the party's donor base and activists. The member must balance the demands of institutional governance with the demands of partisan performance, a task that becomes more difficult as the national party brands become more polarized. Madison wrote Federalist number 10 in a ratification fight where anti-federalists warned that a large republic would become unresponsive, corrupt, or prey to dangerous majorities. He answered with the phrase violence of faction, defining the threat as a group driven by passion or interest adverse to the rights of others or to the permanent interests of the community. The essay was not a seminar note about pluralism. It was a political intervention designed to sell a new constitutional order by arguing that size itself could dilute concentrated factional power. When Madison promised to refine and enlarge the public views, he was defending representation as a filter that would slow passion and channel power through selected office holders. Those words were chosen for readers who feared both mob rule and distant elite rule. The argument depended on a fragile claim that institutions built to filter public opinion would still answer to the public often enough to remain legitimate. That is where the text cuts today. Modern map drawers use software, precinct returns, and demographic files to produce districts that do far more than refine. They sort, protect, and entrench. Incumbency compounds the effect through staff, donor networks, casework, and media access. Madison wanted institutions strong enough to restrain instability. The present dispute is whether those same filters now protect office holders and partisan coalitions from accountability more effectively than they protect the republic from faction. The sheet of paper from 1787 therefore becomes a weapon in a current fight over whether insulation still serves Republican government or now serves partisan survival. National parties, campaign analytics, and redistricting software gave factions the scale and precision Madison did not foresee. A constitutional design built to break up concentrated power can now be operated by professionals who know exactly where to pack voters, where to crack them, and how to turn a temporary advantage into a durable congressional shield. The consequences of congressional insulation and divided government are visible in the daily operations of the House and Senate. Because so many districts are safe for one party, the primary election is often the only time a member faces a real challenge. This incentivizes members to cater to the more ideological and activist wing of their party, making them less willing to compromise in the general legislative process. The fear of being primaried from the right or the left is a more immediate pressure for many lawmakers than the fear of losing the general election. This leads to the polarization of the chambers, where the ideological gap between the two parties widens and the center of the legislature disappears. Divided government often results in a shift from lawmaking to oversight and investigation. When different parties control the branches, the legislature uses its subpoena power and its control over the budget to challenge the executive. This oversight is a vital part of the constitutional system of checks and balances, but it can also be used as a tool for partisan warfare. In an environment of constant campaigning, investigations can be timed to influence the next election rather than to correct an administrative failure. The result is a legislature that is effective at blocking the other side's agenda, but steadily ineffective at passing its own. The incumbency advantage also creates a more experienced but less representative legislature. While the experience of long-serving members can be an asset in managing complex policy issues, it can also lead to a seniority system that rewards tenure over performance. It can make it more difficult for new voices and new ideas to enter the system. The high cost of challenging an incumbent and the safety provided by gerrymandered districts create a barrier to entry that discourages competition. The insulation that Madison hoped would produce wisdom can also produce stagnation and a sense among the public that the government is disconnected from their lived reality. The electoral system shapes political behavior through its design. Gerrymandering is a strategy. Incumbency is a suite of resources. Divided government is an institutional outcome produced by staggered elections, different constituencies, and geographic sorting. The Madisonian filters are still in place, but they are now being operated by a partisan and technological machine that the founding generation never imagined. The live question is whether that machine still serves the true interest of their country, or whether it now serves the people who learn to run the filters for themselves. The unresolved question is whether representation remains genuine when the decisive election may be the map-making process itself.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.